features authors with new and upcoming historical fiction novels. Today's a special edition of What's New in Historical Fiction because usually we bring on numerous authors with numerous titles. Today we have numerous authors with one title. They co-authored the novel When We Had Wings. So I'm really excited to talk to them about their new book that's coming out this month. Before I do, let me tell you a little bit more about myself and also this how to use Crowdcast here. So my name is Colin Mustful. I'm the founder and editor of History Through Fiction, and we are publishers of historical novels. Crowdcast is a great platform for hosting these author panels. There are a few features I just want to tell you about before we get going. So I see some of you have already found the chat feature, and that's in the lower right or on the right side of your screen there. You can see these chat boxes, and if you type on the lower right, you can say hello, you can interact with some of the other attendees. So please just make sure to say hello, let us know where you're joining us from, maybe something that you're reading or what you're looking forward to reading next. Maybe it's this book, When We Had Wings. We have an Ask the Question feature, a Q&A. So that's a little chat box with a question mark in it. If you have any questions for our panelists, please post that question in the Q&A rather than the chat feature. That way, it just helps me be able to find where those questions are. If you don't have a question, just open up that Q&A and you can vote on which questions you like the most, which question you want to see asked. Because if I get a dozen questions, I may have to just resort to the ones that get voted on the most. Other than that, we have a button on the bottom that says Get Your Copy, a green button. That'll send you to bookshop.org, where you can pre-order When We Had Wings. And the reason we send you to bookshop.org is because they donate money back to booksellers, to small independent bookstores. And so we think that's really important to support them. Finally, if you do run into any technical difficulties, my best advice is just to leave and come back. Crowdcast tends to work best on Chrome browser, and also maybe closing out other tabs kind of helps. Okay, with all that said, let me bring on our panelists. I'm going to switch myself over to the wing. And just, okay.
It's like when we were in the wings.
Yeah, oh, exactly. Well, I want to start with Susan Meisner. If you could just introduce yourself, and I'm going to have each one of these panelists read a part of the book that's specific to them. So Susan, if you could introduce yourself and read an excerpt for us.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So yes, my name is Susan Meisner. I'm coming to you tonight from the Pacific Northwest. My husband, Bob, and I, we just moved here from our hometown of San Diego, California. And yes, we've given up the abundant sunshine for the moody and broody Pacific Northwest, but it's so pretty up here. And we're very close to the water, very happy to be here. We have 4 adult children, 5 sweet little grandchildren. And I've been writing books since 2004. I think I've written 21 novels now. Historical fiction is definitely my favorite. I've tried different genres, and this is my wheelhouse. Really happy to be writing historical fiction. I love that it transports us back to the past so that we can experience it through the vehicle of story. No other book can do that but fiction, because it puts you in the heart and soul and shoes of people just like us. And I just love that about fiction. So my character in this book, her name is Eleanor. She's from Minnesota. I lived in Minnesota for a little while, so I kind of can identify with her. She's the daughter of a dairy farmer, and she's never been anywhere. And if you know Minnesota, you know there's no ocean near it, but she joins the Navy. And I'll read the excerpt, it's only 4 paragraphs long, and she tells you why she joined the Navy. But she joined the Navy, it's 1941, it's August of 1941. And for the first time in her life, she is thousands of miles away from home. She's just landed or got off of a ship in Manila Harbor in the Philippines. And this is Eleanor's first 4 paragraphs. A sultry and sweetly fragrant breeze swept up across Manila Bay as Eleanor Lindstrom walked carefully down the gangplank of the just docked naval transport ship, mindful that her land legs might be slow in returning. A band was playing a cheerful Benny Goodman tune as she and other disembarking servicemen and women stepped onto solid ground. Filipino nationals on the other side of a rope held up by stanchions were waving hello and hawking maps of the islands, or taxi rides, or paper bags of sweets, or bouquets of aromatic frangipani blossoms. The late afternoon air was thick with their excitement, but also with humidity that rivaled anything Eleanor had felt back home on a Minnesota midsummer's day. The mood all around her was festive, despite the stifling heat, and she wanted to linger, to take it all in, and let the buoyant atmosphere energize her, fortify her, calm her. Crossing the Pacific, especially for a 23-year-old Minnesotan who had never even seen the ocean before, had been challenging, yes, but it wasn't just the fatigue of travel that made her want to stop and fully embrace the novelty of her new surroundings. It was far more than that. It was deciding on a whim to apply to the Navy and getting accepted so quickly, leaving for training barely 3 weeks after signing on the dotted line, saying goodbye to civilian life, leaving her friends and fellow nurses at Abbott Northwestern Hospital in Minneapolis, hugging her parents and sister farewell, and knowing a 3-year overseas assignment meant it would likely be several years before she saw them or the family dairy barns again. And all this change because she'd fallen in love with a man who loved another.
Yay.
Yay.
Like more for the first time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Susan.
You bet.
That was beautiful. And I'm a Minnesotan. I could relate to a lot of that. And I was born at Abbott Northwestern Hospital.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. Wow. Small world.
Yeah.
That's cool.
That is fantastic.
It's almost like we paid him to say that. Awesome. And I love too, by the way, that Anissa here had just said that, or was it, who's it? Somebody said that, oh, it's Sharon. Sorry, person said it sounds like a Minnesota name. I love that.
Right? Oh yeah,
Well,
definitely.
there's a town of Lindstrom. So,
Yes.
That is
well,
great.
let's move on to Ariel. If you could introduce yourself and read a portion of the book for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Ariel Lahon. I am coming to you guys from Nashville, Tennessee tonight. So other side of the country than Susan and Christina. I live here with my husband and our 4 boys, only one of whom is grown, and even then just quasi-grown. We took our oldest to college just a couple months ago. The rest are either in high school or junior high, so we have just a little bit of major parenting left to do. And I too have written historical fiction my entire career. I don't know that I purposefully set out to do it. I just found a story that I loved. And then I found another story that I loved, and another and another. And they all happened to be in the past. And I have learned that I love this genre because it enables me to fill in the gaps in my education. I don't think anyone finishes their education knowing everything. And writing historical fiction has allowed me to continually learn and to be a student for life. And it's fun for me. I love the research. So my character, her name is Penny, and she comes from Texas, and I love Texas. My parents were Texans. My husband is a Texan. 2 of my kids are Texans. So I feel very, very fond of the species, and they are a species of their own, let me tell you.
They're their own country.
I do, yes. So I'm jumping forward a little bit in the story. At this point, our nurses are officially at war. And the scene I'm going to read to you is the scene that I think about when I think about Penny. And so I'm going to give you a glimpse of her very first assisted surgery in the book. And I think you'll learn a little bit about her. "Are you ready?" Dr. Cooper asked. Penny set her gloved fingers against the boy's scar, smearing blood across his brow. Too young for a beard. He shouldn't be here. Yes, she said. Blood didn't scare her, nor did the inherent sights and smells come to every operating room. It wasn't until Corregidor, however, that she discovered the only part of her profession that truly upset her were the sounds. Nothing could weaken her resolve like a grown man crying for his mother. Thankfully, the boy on the table was lost in a fog of anesthesia. But that only made the zzz, zzz, zzz noise of Dr. Cooper's handsaw all the clearer. It sounded like a zipper being yanked up and down as he worked his way through what was left of the boy's ankle. Penny rarely knew the names of her patients, but it felt like a tragedy at that moment as she swabbed the steady flow of blood from the newly severed veins and flesh. She swallowed hard, blinked twice, and held his lower leg steady. The foot was already dead, and the tarsus had been shattered, along with the lower part of his tibia, so Cooper made quick work of the amputation. But it was the thud of the boy's foot being dropped into a bucket beside the table that made Penny wince. She'd never assisted with a surgery like this in nursing school. She'd never heard a sound like that. And during those first languid months in Manila, the worst injuries she'd treated were sunburns and splinters, and once a broken nose after a soldier drunkenly fell down 3 steps and caught himself on the pavement with his face. Until Corregidor, she'd felt as though she'd been a nurse in name only. Poor Penny.
So good.
Yeah, so vivid, so real. But thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Well, let's go to Christina. If you could introduce yourself and read a portion of the novel for us.
Absolutely. So, and I just have to say, I just remember the first time reading that. I mean, it's so fun because we're friends. We're like Ocean's 11 is how I call it. We're friends that get to play together and work together at the same time. It's so great. And to be able to read, I remember the first time we got to read each other's chapters, and I remember distinctly thinking that I hadn't thought about the sounds. You always think of like maybe the smells in surgery, sights, and that was impactful for me. So I'm so happy you read that. So I am Christina Mcmorris, and I am just outside Portland, Oregon. So a West Coaster now, been a West Coaster for a long time. And so Sue has somehow flown past me and gone north. I'm like, no, stop, like Forrest Gump, stop. So next, I'll have to reel her down here, but I think I have to get her grandchildren down here first. So I'll work on it. I am a mom of 2 teenage boys that keep me busy. And just like Ariel, my oldest just moved into college down at Chapman University in Orange County. And he's an animation major, so got into their film school, and so happy he stayed on the West Coast. It's just kind of a 2-hour flight, which is fabulous. And so that's Tristan, and Kieran is my younger one, and he is 16 going on 40. Alone joined like 3 more clubs. I don't know. I think he's in 5 clubs and now 2 sports. I thankfully he just started driving. I can say thankfully, only because now he can take these things, which helps, get rid of the total fear of every time he gets in the car by himself. So that's. As far as writing, I've been writing novels since, my gosh, Ariel and I combined still do not add up.
It's true.
Just slow down. The rest of us look bad. So let's see here. I wrote my first one, Letters from Home, back in, I think it was published anyway in 2011. And that was inspired by my grandparents' World War II courtship letters. When I was creating a self-published cookbook full of my grandmother's recipes and biographical section about her life. She shared her letters from my grandfather that nobody knew she had. And next thing you know, I think it's going to make a great movie. Oh, okay, I guess I'll write the book first. And then like The Godfather, once you're in, you can't get out. Of course, I love it. And it's so much fun. And I think of, as these gals know, I think of historical fiction as being literary Advil, is what I call it. And that you get a sugar coating of a story on the outside and don't realize how much good stuff in history get on the inside until it's over. And just like a reader, I like to look back and think, wow, I actually learned a lot too. And that is my absolute favorite thing about historical fiction, aside from the fact that it's the one genre more than all the others that I love too, but that I lose myself completely in another world as a reader. And that's why I just keep writing it. So it's kind of just there. As far as my excerpt goes, I'll read you, and I'm sure we'll be talking more about our characters throughout the show, because I'd love to tell you more about, and love to hear more too, and tell you more about Lita. So my character is Lita. And at this point, the war has already started then in the Philippines. And so here's a little excerpt from her take on the war. Lita's lips went still, and an ache pulsed within her. It had been 5 years since the last of her sisters left for the States. She'd be lying if she said she hadn't reveled in being the only child for once, a chance to be her own person, whoever that was. Meanwhile, they were off building their lives full of new loves, one with a beau, the other married just last fall, and the oldest married with little ones whom Lita knew through photos and stories. Oh, how worried her sisters must be over her safety now. She dashed off a letter in Manila, though she had little confidence post would be getting through for some time. She wished she could be with them at this very moment, far away in New York, where war would exist only in newspapers and on the airwaves, where her nails wouldn't be stained daily with blood, nor her mind seared with the moans and cries and images from an endless assembly line of patients shredded by war. Would she ever divulge to them all she'd experienced? How could they ever fully understand? Unlike Penny and Eleanor. Wherever her friends were, Lita prayed they were alive and safe, and that one day soon they'd all be together again, laughing and dancing and chatting the night away. Da-da-da.
Yay.
To find out if they do.
Thank you, Christina. Yeah, it's just incredible to try and imagine what these women went through, what these soldiers went through. So it's, I think it's wonderful that all of you are able to bring that to life and give us that literary Advil to learn a little bit about it. So I've got a lot of questions for all of you. I see that some people have started posting questions in the Q&A, so thank you for that. I'm going to go through a few questions for you, and then I'll look to that Q&A to see what else we can ask you from the audience. So I guess the first thing I would like to know is just like a historical backdrop. So maybe Christina, you could talk about this. Who are the Angels of Baton? What should we know about the history here?
Sure thing. Oh, we love talking about the Angels of Baton, and that, of course, is what gives us our title of When We Had Wings. So and quick just too of the story, which you probably all gathered just even before getting on here with us, is that we do have 3 nurses then that are U.S. Army, U.S. Navy, and a Filipina nurse. And it was perfect when we researched and found there were 3 different types of nurses. It was like, well, there you go. Good thing we don't have a 4th friend.
We're out of friends. No more.
One, and we'd have to vote and it'd have been ugly. So it was good. So in our story, of course, the 3 are become fast friends in Manila. And that is right before the Japanese Imperial Forces then attack the Philippines the very next day that they attacked Pearl Harbor. So the way that we all picture the Paradise Station of Pearl Harbor is the same in Manila. It was the Pearl of the Orient, and that same attack happened the very next day, which we did not know about until we really researched more. And so our nurses, as you can imagine, their lives change completely, and they float in and out of each other's lives and go through a lot of things that we can't wait to share with you as being some of the first female POWs of World War II. And so because of the amazing things that they did during World War II, they were dubbed by the servicemen as the Angels of Baton. And when you read about them in other novels and nonfiction books, and hopefully then our novel, you'll find out why they were so aptly named that. Because not only did they somehow keep themselves alive through the most harrowing conditions, starvation, every kind of tropical disease that you can imagine, many times, malaria, beriberi, dengue fever, and they also survived in the Japanese occupation, which, as you can all imagine, was very, very harsh. And then they tried to keep everyone alive around them, sometimes risking their own lives to get things on the black market, getting medication, whatever it took, with the very little resources they had to keep people healthy and alive. So that is a very good reason why they were named the Angels of Baton.
Yeah, it's an incredible story, and it's amazing how many valuable stories came out of tragedy, came out of World War II, and we're always, finding more and just and new ways to tell those stories because, like you brought up, there's information about this, but not through historical fiction, not brought to life that way. Susan, I wonder if you could talk about the inspiration, like whose idea was it to write this story and then invite others to join you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we share the same literary agent, and she was approached to see if the three of us would like to collaborate on a novel. And it didn't take long for us to decide, gosh, that would be fun. But what should we write about? And we knew that that we wanted to do something from history, World War II, and we wanted to shine a light on perhaps some figures in the past who perhaps had been unsung. And there's a lot of World War II books out there right now, and they're all wonderful, and they all deserve to be there. But I know some people are getting tired of World War II books, and I assure you, this is one you have not read. There are very, very few books written about these remarkable women, and so with that in mind, we thought, well, this would be a great story to tell. There's a wonderful book by Elizabeth R. Norman called We Band of Angels, which was kind of our Bible as we decided this was the idea, and that there were three kinds of nurses: U.S. Navy, U.S. Army, and Filipina nationals working for the U.S. Army. It seemed like the perfect template for us to tell a story. We wanted full control of these women, their stories, and so we fictionalized. Our three gals do not exist in history, but everything they experience within the pages of our book could easily have happened to one of the real angels, because so much of what we wrote about, we drew from actual experiences. And so you'll be amazed at how brave these women were and are. And we just felt like their story should be told. The last one left us in 2013. There are no more of these amazing women left to tell their story. So it's up to storytellers like us to do that. And we're very, very happy to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I'm actually surprised to hear you say that your agent came with the idea of collaborating before the idea for what the story was going to be.
Yeah,
so
it was kind of different for us too. That was interesting.
Yeah.
And so far, this is the first time we've met, and you at least in front of a camera, you all are very good together. What was the collaboration like? How did it all come together? Ariel, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think I can speak for all of us when I say it was actually really fun. Not without its difficulties, because you have three very, very strong type A women telling one story. I think there's not a single one of us who is shy in any way. But in that sense, it worked really well because I knew Susan. I've known Susan for a long time. Susan knew Christina. I knew of Christina. We've actually never met in person. We'll get to do that.
That's weird. You're right.
In just a couple weeks. So, but we have spent over the last, probably, is it 2.5 years now? It's, I guess, 2.5 years now, enormous amounts of time on the phone, on Zoom, texting. And we began at the beginning going, this is the story we have. This is what we want to tell. We figured out which nurse we each wanted to write. And then we each kind of went our separate ways for a little bit and found the important parts of those stories. And over the course of months, we would come back and weave the story together. I believe that Susan was the first one to write her pages. I was on deadline for something else. So Susan's pages came in and we looked at it, and then I wrote mine, and then Christina wrote hers, and we wove them together. And I don't think you agree to write a book like this unless you are looking forward to a creative challenge. I know that I was. I knew that I was looking forward to working with both of these women because I like them and I respect them, and I never once doubted that they could tell a beautiful story in a beautiful way. So I think we went into this project innately trusting the others that we could all pull it off because we had before. And these are the women that I read for fun. So in that sense, I was getting to know my literary heroes in a different way as well. And anytime something came up that we were not all three on the same page about, it didn't end up being that big of an issue, because if one of us felt very strongly about something, the others deferred. And we all approached it in the way that the story itself was what mattered, and the decisions we made in such a way that it served the overall story. So, I mean, we got to the end of it and we have this book that we're really proud of, and we still like each other. So success all the way around.
Yay.
like each other more. I think like it was
Yeah.
such a good way to get to know each other more in the process. And I've joked with them that, that you don't always like, there are friends not to travel with. More before the trip. We all know what we're talking about there. And you don't know, like you are going in for not just a little weekend getaway. It is a 400-page novel. And and so that's, I think, a real testament to our friendship. And we figured out how to collaborate. And just the same, these nurses had to adapt and kind of choose our battles in such a good, I think, healthy way.
Well, and also in some ways, trial by fire. It is, I mean, like Susan said, it's not like the three of us got together and said, hey, let's do this thing. And this is how we'll do it. And we didn't bring this idea fully formed to anyone. Someone came to us and they said, you and you and you. Shake and bake. And we figured it out really quick.
Oh my gosh, I'm picturing like shaking, like, I have no idea what you're talking about right now. The paper bag, yes.
Yeah.
That is, they put the three of us together, like shake us around and spit out a book. Yeah.
Well, you've kind of given us a little bit of insight into the process. As you said, it's 2.5 years. It's not just a vacation together. I'm sure there's lots of stories you could tell. I won't ask you to go into those stories, but I am curious, maybe what are some of the advantages and disadvantages of doing it this way? And I want to start with you, Susan, because you're all very accomplished authors, but Susan's the most prolific here, got the most under her belt. What do you see as the advantages of collaborating with two other very accomplished authors? And maybe what are some of the drawbacks that maybe you, for a minute, you missed just writing your own novel?
That's a great question, actually. I think what I noticed first and foremost was I had two people helping me polish my novel as I'm writing it. Usually when we write our books, we turn them in to our editor, and then she has it or he has it. And then they're the ones who are giving all kinds of input and suggestions and sometimes criticism. And it's a lot to take in all at once. And you get it after you've finished the book. But with this, we wrote it with each other in progress. And so I would write and they would read and I would be able to polish as I was writing. And it really it made the book, when we turned it in, it was a really good book when we turned it in. I think it's because we had three eyes, three sets of eyes on every paragraph. That was a wonderful thing for me, in that our revisions, I think they weren't wide sweeping. We didn't have to make huge developmental changes, which often happens to you when you write solely. So that to me is a huge advantage, is having that. And the other thing I think I liked was just rounding out a character. Sometimes when you're writing, I think always as you're writing, you've kind of got tunnel vision. You can only see your character one way. When you have two other people sharing the entire experience with you, they can help you see things about your character that you're just too close to see. It's a pretty wonderful way to be able to write a book, is to have people there with you. Kind of in the labor and delivery room. I mean, they're helping you deliver the baby. It's like having coaches in the room with you. The disadvantages, of course, are that you lose a little bit of that autonomy. You lose a little bit of the independence you have when you make all the decisions yourself. But really, once you turn your book in, you're starting to lose that independence too. There comes a point in every book's life when the author has to back up and give away some of that control, which happens in the revising stage. And so with this, it just happens a little earlier. And I also learned that there's more than one way to write a book. I mean, I knew that, but when you're collaborating, you really understand that there are many ways to write a book, and my way is not the only way. And just to be able to be flexible.
I think we probably, all three of us, have very different ways of writing when we are doing our own project. I don't know that we actually have many similarities probably in how we would go about doing that on a day-to-day basis. And it was really fun to get a real-time view of everyone else's process.
Yeah.
Starting with our shared Google Doc.
Which will never be published.
Never.
Because we wrote a synopsis then that we handed over before we started the book. So that way we knew that we were on the right track, that the editor, that our editor was already on board, so that we weren't starting from scratch, and we wouldn't have that time to do that if, with all of our deadlines, et cetera.
Mhm.
So we did have a Google Doc that was our synopsis. And each one of us at one point, all three of us were in there and writing our own sentences in different sections of what our character would go through the war. And, it just seemed that Susan she had a pastor, and I think he was like, I decided that he needed to be like a little beefed up. And so I started adding descriptions to him that would probably...
She called him smoking hot. And here I am typing this about this sweet little Eleanor dairy farmer, looking at the pastor whom she's falling in love with, and she calls him the smoking hot pastor as I'm writing. And I didn't realize she was in the document at the same time. It was an unforgettable moment. I'll never forget it. Highly hilarious.
At that point, we all said, this is going to be fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like there are more advantages than disadvantages to a co-authored novel. Christina, do you think this is going to be more common in the future?
Yeah, I think we're seeing it quite a bit. I think all of us, the three of us, for sure have good friends in different genres, both in domestic thrillers, definitely historical fiction, that people are collaborating in 2s or 3s. And I think that people are seeing each other going, this is fun. Like, and it's just another muscle to flex. It's another sample of our work to kind of cross over to each other's readers that obviously are the same genre lovers, and it's fun. And now we get to do things like, go do a launch event at Parnassus coming up in Nashville. So we're heading over to Ariel's neck of the woods, and then down at Warwick's in San Diego, and I'm sure we'll talk about this at the end, but also Adventures by the Book. So being able to do live events together that we just also get to just hang out with each other in person, it's such a treat. But yeah, I think we all learned a lot through this process too. And I will say, process-wise, my side, as far as the challenge, be interesting to hear what we all kind of tackled as what we learned from it. And I can say that one of the biggest challenges I had in this was I was the third person to write, because I was still finishing a solo book. And when it finally got to me, then we had outlined in the beginning. But of course, that needs to evolve because of what is in our minds and what is practical on the page became two different things as we researched to and found out what's possible and what's practical, and what would make a good story. So by the time it got to me, I think of it as kind of like a golfer or slalom skier. All of a sudden I went, wait a minute, these flags weren't there last time. Why are there more sand pits than I looked last time I practiced?
We moved your cheese.
Like Minecraft, and I came in and I'm like, these goats weren't here, these sheep weren't here last time. So I went, okay. So where you sit there and go, oh my gosh, and I have that deadline's not moving. So I'm like, okay, I've got to solve this fast. And to a point that I remember the biggest one that I felt so proud of, and did not panic, because that does not help, is that I remember coming in and thinking, okay, I'll write my chapter here and I want a cliffhanger. But then my character does not come back for a few chapters. And because of Eleanor going through some things that were really important that took time, it was like, remember Ariel? I called him like, it's a 8-month jump. I'm like, do you have thoughts? How do I have a cliffhanger that picks up after 8 months, of just a few chapters, but 8 months? And that was, as a solo book, you usually wouldn't do that, and you think, okay, there's got to be a solution here. And I was in the shower where I can stand there alone and everybody leaves me alone. I don't know about Ariel, but that's my quiet space.
Oh yeah.
And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I know the solution. And it was so exciting. It kind of, reminds me of just one of my favorite movies is Apollo 13. And, when they sit in that room and they go, here's all your stuff. This is what they have up there. Solve it. And you go, okay, like I'm not getting more equipment here. So how do I put this together and make it work? And when it works and you think, oh my gosh, this is so exciting. I was thrilled, and that was really fun. It was a new challenge for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I can imagine it's very startling to find something changed, to go back to it and you're like, now what do I do?
Yeah. But it was great. I mean, it really made me feel more confident, I think, in my own solo work then too. Because I'm like, okay, there is a solution. I have no choice but to find it. So, because we are not starting from scratch here.
Well, it seemed to reiterate to me what I have always known or have been learning in my solo work, is that the answer is already there. It already exists. I just have to find it. And somehow knowing that the answer already exists does help you calm down and go, okay, it's there. It's there. I just have to find it. Where's the logic here? What are my options? What tools do I have to work with? And you go find the answer.
For sure.
Well,
And if you have two other brains helping you, then it's much easier to find the answer.
Definitely. We're getting a lot of questions, so thank you for the audience for that. I want to get to two more questions, and then I'm going to get to those questions from the audience. And I think somebody did post this in the chat. Now, I know you didn't go to the Philippines together because not all of you have met yet. Did any of you get a chance to go to the Philippines for research?
This was our pandemic book, so yeah, nobody went anywhere when we were writing this book. We would have loved to have gone, but there was no travel happening when we were writing this book. So we're very, very, very grateful for such wonderful works of nonfiction that allowed us to travel there in our minds, and places like Google Earth that allow you to kind of visit from afar. So I wish we could have gone.
Yeah, it would have been great. And really, we are just now, with the launch of this book, at the point where we can be together in a room finally. I know many co-authors will sometimes take a weekend or a week away and they'll brainstorm or edit, and that would have been amazing, but it was also impossible over the last 2 years with travel restrictions. So we Zoomed a lot. We texted a lot.
Definitely. And I will say on my side, with the Filipino food and culture was really nice. And then, of course, Japanese, having historical language that was time appropriate and from soldiers and commanders, making sure that was right. I was so fortunate that I had, my dad is from Kyoto. So I know obviously then a number of fabulous, really helpful Japanese people that helped me with the language and kind of making sure that all of our Japanese was correct for the time period. And then growing up, which is why I was so excited to write Lita, is because, and she's named after the mother of the best friend I grew up with. So Angelita is the mother's name, and they call her Lita. And so, of course, I had to use that. Well, growing up, all of my good friends growing up, all the girls were all Filipina. And so, and if any of you are friends with a Filipino person, if you are friends with one, you are friends with the whole family, right? So there is not being friends with one Filipino person. It was amazing growing up in their house, and they eat all day long. There is food all day that is amazing, that for every single holiday, like with Father's Day, and it starts at 8 a.m. and it goes until midnight of food, just all that you graze all day. And so a lot of that food that we got to incorporate in some of our favorites, and then also, of course, being able to borrow all of my friends' cousins' names. I would they need more names, and so they would give me ones that were traditional, that would have been around back then, but they gave me all their cousins' names, so all of their cousins are in the book somewhere.
It sounds like we should all go and make some friends from the Philippines if we don't.
Yeah, we all need those for sure. There's such amazing people. I mean, I think in general, and the culture is so giving and generous. And when you learn about, which I didn't realize until we started writing this book, somehow I had missed the fact that my friends, that almost all of their aunts are nurses. And I did not know that. And it wasn't until we started writing it that we researched about the nursing program that worked as a really great immigration pipeline from the Philippines, being trained by Americans to then come over to the US. So there are so many nurses that are Filipino and Filipina that I didn't realize until then. And then you start researching it, and it's amazing. And they are such caregivers just by their nature. So a lot of teachers and a lot of nurses. It's really beautiful.
Well, I wanted to ask about the memorial in the Philippines at, I'm not sure if I'm saying this right, Mount Shamet. It seems, I had never heard of the Angels of Baton until this book was introduced to me. And it's nice that there's a memorial in the Philippines. But Susan, do you think there should be more to recognize the what these women accomplished and what they went through?
I absolutely do. I'm very grateful. There's a memorial there for these women, but it came 40 years after their bravery. Some of them had already passed on. It was the Reagan administration that made sure it happened. So that was the 1980s. So 4 decades had passed, which was too long, I think. And the other thing is that they're known as the Angels of Baton, but not all of the nurses were on the Baton Peninsula. The Navy nurses were never on Baton at all. And so it doesn't say enough. The memorial is wonderful, but if you read the inscription on the stone, it really recognizes their sacrifices and bravery in the early part of the war. And it really doesn't address their amazing resiliency for 3.5 horrible years. So if it were up to me, I would recast that memorial. I would make it expansive, and I would say more, because it wasn't just the Baton Peninsula, which is just a place. It's a geographic location, because it was all the nurses in the Philippines in every place where they were stationed, including the Navy nurses who were elsewhere. So there's more that can be said, but at least there's something there. And perhaps because there's one thing there, then something else could maybe come later that would kind of add to the story.
And I'll tack on really quick that if you've never heard of the Angels of Baton or not know much about them, there is a very not good reason, but there is a reason for that. And that is because after the war, when the women there, just like we're all familiar with the Death March in Baton, then these women were abandoned along with the servicemen. So when they came back to the U.S. after the war and took them on, I know what Sue calls, which is great, lipstick and curlers tour, that they put lipstick on them. Some of them weighed about 80 pounds at that point from starvation, and then took them on a shopping trip and then a victory tour with MacArthur around the country. Well, they basically kind of paraded them around and then said, do not talk about your experiences from the war. I think they did not want to highlight the fact that they had been abandoned. So a lot of these women did not talk about their experiences, or certainly didn't write them down in a way that was published until toward the end of their lives. And I think more of them started doing interviews and then writing some memoirs. And that's the reason that we know about them.
Yeah, it was so unfortunate, in fact, that they were required to sign forms saying they would never talk about it. And the reason is, like Christina said, MacArthur had an opportunity to evacuate them all, and he chose to take other military personnel instead. And therefore, the U.S. military made a choice to leave these women in the jaws of war, knowing that anything could happen. And they were heroic in the face of that. And it wasn't until really their children and their grandchildren began asking questions later that many of these stories started coming out.
Absolutely.
Well, I want to get to some of the questions here by the audience. It looks like we've covered quite a few of them. Before I do want to remind people, if this you can get the copy of the book if you click on that link on the bottom. Get your copy; it'll send you to bookshop.org. If this conversation hasn't convinced you that you need to read this book, I don't know what will. But yeah, please do that. I also want to say thank you to those who have contributed. This is a free event, but you also have the option to contribute, and I really appreciate those contributions. It helps pay for the platform and ensures that History Through Fiction can host more events like this. So one of the questions I wanted to get to here from the audience was, how did you, it's from Sharon, how did you decide who would write what character in the book? So how did you decide to split it up? Ariel, why don't you, sorry, Christina, go ahead.
I was just going to say, because I've already pretty much answered it, so I'll make mine quick. And that was because of Lita and being part Asian, being half Asian myself. My character was a mestiza, so the Filipino name for being half, and the struggles of figuring out where you belong. So I can go ahead and just step aside there, since I've already explained about why my personal connection to her.
Yeah. So for me, I was drawn to the Army nurse. My father was a military police during Vietnam. My grandfather was a lieutenant colonel during World War II with the United States Army. So as much as I love Texans, I have a deep fondness for the Army as well, and what those men and women went through. And so when it kind of came down to deciding, it seemed natural to me. I'm familiar with at least the general workings of how the Army goes.
And I chose Navy, not just because it was the only one left, but because my father-in-law was in the Navy, served in Korea, and my son was in the Navy. I lived in Minnesota, so I chose Minnesota for her home. But I'm also from San Diego, which is a Navy town. So I know the Navy life as much as you can know it from being an observer. I'm an Air Force wife, but I knew enough about the military and the Navy life I feel like I could get my hands around that character.
Well, that certainly makes sense. It's kind of easy. Well, I guess that's another advantage of co-writing a novel, because when you're writing historical fiction, there's so many little corners, little details that you have to try your best you can to get right. But certainly having three of you with your own personal experiences, your own backgrounds, that definitely sounds like it helps, that you can fill in all those pieces and get them right, make them more authentic.
Yeah.
I see that Michelle asks, is it true that nurses came there before the war even started? Christina, what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said, it was kind of the Pearl of the Orient. It was the luxury station. Can you imagine that like a girl from Minnesota that wants to go see the world, and you were in paradise? And the way that they, sold them, of course, as they were recruiting all of these women too, would have been that you've got palm trees and sandy beaches and galas at night. And this is, this really was reality until you go to war, until there is an attack from the Japanese forces. So yes, that is absolutely true, which is why our characters become fast friends right before the invasion.
Yeah, I think we've spent so much time focusing on their work as nurses. I had to remind myself constantly that these were officers in the United States military. They were stationed on a military base as part of their service, and they were there before the war broke out, but they were also, they were military members. And what's fascinating, the reason that they ended up in civilian camps throughout the war is that the Japanese did not really know what to do with female service members. So instead of being sent off with the men on the Baton Death March, they were sent to civilian camps, which is where they served, and they kind of kept rank in their specific camps that entire time.
And the unusual part about the Filipinas too, that I'll add, just because I think we were all surprised by this, was that they were seen as Asians too by the Japanese, but worse, because they were Asians who were traitors then. And as if you're familiar at all with how the Japanese forces, tackled World War II, that you didn't surrender to the Japanese, because they thought that surrendering, that's why they would kill themselves instead very often, because to surrender and to be a POW was just the lowest of the low. And so to be a traitor was very dangerous in their view.
Someone asks about the nurses, and if any are still alive now. I know you did mention that the last had left us in 2013, but that did, and you've gone over some of the nonfiction sources you've used, but I'm wondering if you had any oral histories, any interviews you were able to listen to or watch. Susan, did that enter into any of your research?
I was able to get my hands on a book that was written by Dorothy Sill. And Dorothy was one of the Navy nurses, and someone else wrote her story. So I've got her the way she wrote it as a memoir, and then the person who wrote her biography. Those were helpful. There's also a documentary that I think if you just go onto YouTube, you might be able to find it, because we found it pretty easily on YouTube, Angels of Baton. And I can't remember now if there is video of that.
There's footage of when the documentary was filmed, which I have slept since I watched it, so I forget the year.
Right.
But they interviewed many of the remaining nurses at that time, and so some of them were older. There's a lot of kind of newsreel footage from the time, and it's fascinating. It's immersive, and you the three of us, I think, watched it the same evening, and then that was really one of the moments that we were like, oh, we have to tell this story. These women,
that's true. Yeah,
need to be known.
And Ariel, I want to play off of Barbara's question here. You knew when you had to tell the story, but when did you know the story was going to work? When did you know things were coming together? Wow, this might actually be a fantastic book.
That's a really good question. I can't speak for anyone else. When I write a book on my own, it feels like bedlam. I start a book and I think, this is the time I will fail. It's all bad. I need to give up and go be a Walmart greeter. And I feel it every time I start a book. And at some point with my books, something happens, or I'll have a revelation, or I'll get an idea and I'll write it down. And I go, oh, maybe there's something there. And I distinctly remember with this book, I was on vacation with my family in New Mexico, and I was finishing up my pages before I sent it to the other two. And there was something that Susan had written that made me go, oh, that connects to what I'm doing. And that will also connect to what Christina said she will do. And then you can kind of start feeling those brush strokes come together, and you realize that one of us wrote this bit of dialogue or that description that another character then references later, and it starts to feel like this cohesive whole instead of three separate stories put together. So it was probably, I don't know what percentage of the way in, but there was a point at which I was like, oh, it's all coming together. And it's a feeling that I wait for with every book, mine that I do on my own, and then I got to experience it with this one as well.
Yeah, I think too, for me, I knew the there was already there because all of this really happened. So I knew we had amazing women on which to build our fictional characters. So I knew we just had to tap into what was already there. And if we could do that, we would have a great book.
And for me, I remember it was before we wrote even the synopsis. So do you remember it was the three of us saying, what story could we come up with? And Susan said, watch this documentary about this. You know, it was very brief. Do you remember? It was
like 20 minutes.
Documentary, yeah, that was dated. And it seemed like almost one of those newsreels from the cinemas, and had footage of these, women getting, like the Filipinas getting off of the bus when the Japanese had occupied, and showed the other nurses as well. And I remember I sat there and I said, I was supposed to be working on my novel. And when I was watching it, I thought, if I'm watching it, I might as well take notes. And that's when
right.
I took notes, and I just kept putting notes in and all the numbers and all of the information. I mean, I stopped it and started it about 100 times, backed it up, wrote it all down. And I went, you guys, there's 3 nurses here. There's 3 types. And I messaged them, you remember, with a couple paragraphs. And said, I think this is our whole story. There's 3 nurses, and this is this, and this is what happens here. And now it changed and evolved from that first thing. But that's when our agent got on and said, this is coming together too easily. Like, you guys have your story. And it was all sort of there. It felt like it was like a movie in my head, and it felt like it was already just waiting for us to write it.
It sounds like a great feeling. Well, we're winding down here. I want to get to 2 more questions. One, a couple people have asked, and they want to, and you've kind of gone over this a little bit. So where can people see you, especially if anybody wants to see you in person? And maybe now each one of you has your own website, but is there a website just for the book that people can go and find out when and where these events are? Christina, can you field that one?
Sure. So yeah, on our website and on social media, we'll be doing shout outs for the events as well. And because we're getting toward the holidays, and we're all either right now, me touring with a solo book and the 2 of them working really hard on their solo books. We're not doing an extensive tour that goes into the holidays. So, but we are really excited, like I said, to go to a few places together, and virtual events like this. So we will have more of these. So no matter where you are, you can listen to us tell more stories that we haven't shared yet. And so on our websites, yes, you'll find all the information there, ticketed events and that sort of thing too. And all the links will be there.
Perfect. I do want to ask about what else you're working on. Each one of you does have solo work in addition to this. I can imagine you must be very busy. So Susan, let's start with you. What else are you working on?
So I have a book that's coming out in April 18, and it's called Only the Beautiful. It is a novel about 2 women impacted by the eugenics movement of the early 20th century. And that's a movement you don't hear much about anymore, which is probably a good thing. It wasn't a very good idea but it was very, very prevalent, especially in the United States. And so it's about a woman. She's a young woman, actually, in wine country in California, my home state. She's impacted by the eugenics movement. And so is somebody that she's distantly, I guess you could say, related to, who is a nanny in Nazi-occupied Vienna. And eugenics at its absolute worst was visible in everything Hitler did, especially with the final solution. So there are a lot of parallels to what happened here in our country with the eugenic thinking. It didn't rise to the level of what happened in Nazi Europe, but there's definitely some parallels. And so for that reason, I feel like it's something we ought not to forget. Because you know how they say, if you forget your history, you're apt to repeat it. So that book comes out April 18, Only the Beautiful.
And as I was telling Susan earlier, it is on. I found it on NetGalley myself.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're looking for an early copy and you want to review a copy, it's there. It's available. Sounds like another very important story.
Thank you.
Ariel, how about you? What are you working on?
Yes, on either side of me are the final pages for the final edits of my next novel. It's called The Frozen River, and it takes place in 1790 Maine. So I'm taking a big jump back in time, but it's based on the true story of a woman whose name was Martha Ballard, and she was a midwife in New England in the 1700s. Astonishing for two reasons. The first is that she delivered over 1,000 babies in the course of her career and never lost a mother in childbirth her entire career. Doctors today can't boast a track record like that. The other thing, and the reason that I'm writing the novel in the first place, is that during those 30 years, at a time when most women could not read or write, she kept a diary. And I found a copy of it at an out-of-print bookshop in Maine. And in this diary is recorded every birth, every death, every murder, every scandal. And in it is also recorded it's the only written record of a rape trial that changed the legal system in our country. So it is a murder mystery and a rape trial and a lot of other things. And I am just pages away from being done with it.
Well, congratulations. It sounds like a fascinating story, and to have that kind of access to historical documents that can really, really help you flesh out what happened. And I can imagine it must have been hard to kind of pick and choose all that material, what to focus on.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's right there. It's this big, and it's not even a diary per se. If you know what a day book is, it's short entries, a paragraph per day, and she would give the date and she would give the weather and the events of what happened that particular day. But when you start reading through, you can see all of these little connections and these things that happened and how this person impacted that. And it was a lot of work, but really rewarding.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Christina, you said you were on a solo book tour. Are you also working on your next project, or what are you working on?
So my latest baby, right, Sue says, we deliver out into the world and you hope people don't call it ugly. So my last one is right here. So I can show you because mine's out right now. So it's called The Ways We Hide. And I know there's some fabulous readers that are here tonight that I got to meet on the road, which is so fun. 18 flights in 14 days is what I just completed. I don't recommend that if you're tempted, if it sounds fun.
No, it does not.
I could write a book now called 18 Flights because I have stories, people. I have so many stories. So that book is out now. And as Susan said, every time you think you've heard all the stories from World War II or any era or any genre, you find something new that you think I haven't heard this before, and we have to share it. So in this case, the quick gist of the story is that it is about a female illusionist who is the mastermind behind an escape show in 1942. And the reason she's so good at escape traces back to a childhood trauma she survived in Michigan's Copper Country, which was a story that I was stunned I'd never heard about before, called the Italian Hall Disaster. And that was a photograph I found that was coincidentally on the same web page that I found the very tragic photo that inspired Sold on a Monday. So it was a good day of clickbait, people. And because of that disaster, my character becomes obsessed with escape because she survives it. And she needs 2 ways out of every room at all times. And Houdini becomes her idol. And this leads to her being recruited, which is stranger than fiction, recruited by MI9, which was the go-go gadget team, is what I call them, of World War II. They created escape and evade devices that they smuggled into anything you can think of, including Monopoly boards, which is the article I came across that inspired the rest of the story. And so she gets pulled much deeper in the war than she ever expects. So that is The Ways We Hide. And it's, it's out in the world now. And it's so fun to, as we all know, we write in our caves, and it's fun to have it out there and having readers finally read my character Fenna's journey.
Well, thank you for being here. I mean, you're so busy, and I can't imagine how you even fit it in. So we really appreciate that. Well, before I let the 3 of you go, I do want to ask one more question. And Ariel, you hit on this early, and that's why write historical fiction? What is the value of historical fiction? So Ariel, maybe you could reiterate that and add to it a little bit.
The best way that I know how to answer this is with a story. So when I was in high school, I was obsessed with reading Stephen King novels, and I would start with the author's note because he writes the best author's notes. If you ever read my books, you cannot start with the author's notes because they're filled with spoilers. But Stephen King's were not. And I don't remember which novel it was, but his entire author's note, someone had asked him, why do you write horror? Why are you so drawn to that subject? And he explained it this way. He said that his mind was a sieve, and all the information, he goes about his day, everything he sees and hears gets poured into this sieve. And what's left at the end of the day are these little strange macabre moments, these scary things. The family dog turns into a monster. And I've thought about that for decades now, because what's left in my sieve at the end of the day are these little moments of history that I might be kind of familiar with, but I don't know the full story. And I find myself constantly, like Christina said, you see a photograph on a website and you go, what? I had no idea. I wrote an entire book about the Hindenburg, the last flight of the Hindenburg, because of the photo of it crashing. And when I looked closely at it, there were these little specks, and those specks were people. And I wanted to know who the people were and how they survived. And for me, I love this genre because I constantly get to learn. I have written about 1930s New York and German airships and the Russian Revolution and World War II, and now post-Puritan United States. And I could spend the rest of my life doing it because there are all these stories that I didn't know. And I want to find out who these people are and how they lived and what they did. And I really do believe that the Rudyard Kipling quote, and he says that if history were told in the form of stories, it would never be forgotten. And this is how we remember our history. We just tell stories about it.
Very well said. Thank you for sharing that. Susan, what do you think about the value of historical fiction?
Yeah, for me, I feel like it's a way of taking us back to the past to see what we love and what we value. That's what history reveals to us. It shows us what matters to us. And sometimes in the present, you're living the present and you have a hard time seeing just beyond the current moment. But when you go back in the past and story can take you there, you're able to see what we love and value and what we're afraid of and what we're willing to die for. All of that, I feel like is, it speaks to us today, but only if we go back and look at it. So you've got to read about history to be able to appreciate the lessons we learned from it. And I think that's what we carry with us into the future as we walk in the present, are these lessons from the past.
Yeah, it gives a lot of perspective and kind of reminds you, humbles you. This isn't unique, but what we're going through.
Yes, that's what I love about, personally, for historical fiction, as far as the value I find in it as a writer and a reader, is that we all took those history classes at some point in junior high and high school, that we memorized dates and names. They didn't mean anything to us. We regurgitated and purged it. And I think that when you then realize through what I love, historical fiction, is that they were us at a different time. And there is not that disconnect that feels so distant from us, that World War II was not that long ago, that the civil rights movement was very recent, in the big scope of things.
Mm-hmm.
I think it humanizes history, which I love, and hopefully, we learn from it. So yeah, I think that immersing ourselves into another world and it increases, in my view, empathy, which is what I love about fiction the most, is that we start to feel for people going through hard times, but also, like you said, that there's so many parallels we all found in 2020, right? Mm-hmm. That you go through dark times. There's not much of a darker time than the Holocaust, than World War II, than the Great Depression, and to go through those periods and then know that our characters, but also because they were inspired by real people, really did go through these things. And if they did, hopefully we can too. And I think that gives hope.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you, Christina. It's a great reminder to end on, that it creates empathy. Well, I want to thank our panelists. This has been a fantastic discussion. I've really enjoyed it. I want to thank everyone for attending and remind you that, first of all, make sure you pick up a copy of When We Had Wings, and also that this will be available. This has been recorded, so it's going to be available at this original URL, crowdcast.io/what's new in historical fiction 9. So that you can find the replay here, at this original URL. I will also be posting it to our YouTube channel, History Through Fiction on YouTube, so that you can watch it later or tell your friends about it. So yeah, thank you so much, everybody. This has been a blast.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you for having us. This has been great.
Mm-hmm. Everybody who joined us tonight. Remember, Ariel and I are sending kids to college, so buy our book.
Bye.
Bye.